Welcome to my beginning watercolor tip 24, moisture content part 7, loading the brush. I've added this video to my moisture content series in response to a number of questions that I've received regarding the loading of the brush. Specifically, a lot of people ask, what do I mean when I'm talking about a fully loaded brush? To answer some of those questions, let's first take a look at my setup. I have a ceramic palette with 2 large mixing wells. I use 2 large containers of water, one for dirty water and one for clean, and I use a cotton towel to help clean my brush and take moisture away. Throughout this series, I've used the terms saturated, damp, and low moisture to describe the levels of loading the brush. I'll use the same nomenclature for this video. I'll begin with a saturated loading of the brush, which is essentially what I'm talking about when I say my brush is fully loaded. In this example, I want to make a mixture that will allow me to apply a middle value wash over a fairly large area. So I'm alternating between the pigment and the water, going to the palette with each until I get the value that I'm after. That's the consistency that I want, that I can fully load my brush with. When it's in a saturated or fully loaded condition, it's essentially picked up all the moisture that it can hold without dripping. And the moment that I touch my brush to paper, that bead of water that's being held by tension in that brush is going to release onto the paper very quickly. Now I'm going to demonstrate the application of a wash with a fully loaded brush. You can see as my brush went to the paper, it released the bead of water that was in the brush, and you can see that bead of water at the bottom of the wash right there. And that's an important element in being able to lay down a nice consistent wash, and also aids in the ability to let colors mingle and gradate together on your paper when you're applying your wash. So here's the other tone, the warmer tone that I have, and they both have a bead of water there, and I can just pull those two together and they won't set an edge because I've had that bead of water there. And I can take that wash down the page, and I'm applying this with a saturated brush. It's fully loaded. So when I bring that to the paper, it's got so much moisture that it's ready to drip, but it's not quite to the point where it's going to release the moisture that's in the brush until I put brush to paper. Now I've done this with a large round wash brush, but the technique in the loading is the same whether you're using a round brush or a flat brush. So here's a 1/2 inch flat brush, and it's fully loaded, and I can control that water bead just as I did with the round wash brush. Next, I'm going to go to a clip from one of my other videos to demonstrate how I use this fully loaded or saturated brush to apply a nice even wash to my painting surface. You can see the brush has a lot of water in it, a lot of moisture, and you can see the bead of water starting to build at the bottom of where I've applied this wash. Now I'm using the same wash brush, the round wash brush, and it gives me a nice even wash, and it will allow me now to bring in some other colors here and charge this up a bit without setting an edge, because again I'm applying a very fluid mixture with this brush that's fully loaded. And you can see when I put that brush to paper, I start to get a water bead because it's got so much moisture in it, and when it hits that paper, that tension releases, and that mixture that's held in the brush is released. It's difficult to get this kind of coverage and a nice even wash without having your brush fully loaded with moisture. One of the things to be aware of when you're working like this with a fully loaded brush is you might get a little extra moisture on your paper when you've reached the end of the area you want to cover. In that case, you simply take a damp brush and touch it to the bead of water there, and your brush will pick it right back up off the paper. When I want to change the color on my palette, my mixture, or change the consistency of it, I just simply take a tissue, I spritz it with a spray bottle, and then I take a tissue and I wipe off the pigment. And one of the nice things about the ceramic palette is it cleans up quite nice. It doesn't leave any stains on the palette as some of the plastic palettes do. I've cleaned my palette. Now I'm going to make a mixture on my palette using the same two colors, only this time I'm not going to add as much water. I'm going to load my brush to a damp condition, not saturated, but damp. And the mixture, you can see, isn't going to puddle as much as it did in the previous example. And in fact, I can take my brush and I can make some marks here on the palette, and you can see how it holds its shape as I put it down, and it doesn't puddle because I haven't added as much water to this mixture. So you can see it gives coverage. It may be a little difficult to see on the palette, and I'll show you on the paper, but it covers the paper as you make your brush stroke, but it doesn't leave a bead of water. So here I'm making the worm mixture, and I'm doing the same, and you can see again how my brush stroke will hold its shape and it doesn't just dissolve into a puddle as it did when I was adding much more water to the mixture. This will allow me to load my brush to a damp condition. Now I'm going to go back to the paper that I'm demonstrating on, and I'm going to make some brush marks using a damp brush. So it's not saturated with moisture. It doesn't leave a bead when my brush touches the paper. It doesn't run off and leave a bead on the paper. You can see that it's given full coverage as I make a brush mark, but it's much more precise. It doesn't have a bead of water left as I make the brush mark or as I take my brush to the paper. So this is working with a brush that's loaded to the point of being damp. If I put this in a puddle of very fluid paint and water, it would pick up a lot more. But it's loaded right now to, like I said, it's a damp consistency, and you can see I can make very precise brush marks and create very crisp, hard edges. Again, here is a clip from another video, and this is a painting that's fairly far along in the painting process, and I'm working with a damp brush. It's loaded to a damp condition, and that's allowing me to make very precise brush marks to put some final detail into this painting. And it gives full coverage of the brush stroke, but it doesn't leave a bead of water. So in this instance, I've got a quill brush, and I'm being very precise in the marks I'm making, but it gives nice coverage and it gives a crisp edge to the areas that I'm painting. And this is with a damp loaded brush, not fully loaded. I've cleaned my palette again, and now I'm going to prepare a mixture that will allow me to load my brush to a low moisture condition. Some people refer to that as a dry brush, but it still has moisture, and I refer to it as low moisture. And you can see that my water is getting quite dirty at this point because I've been working with complementary colors, so together they make a gray. And if I were working on a painting, I'd probably be ready for a water change. But I'm not adding as much water to this mixture, and I'm using a 1/2-inch flat brush. And I'm taking my brush to the cloth also to help remove some of the moisture to allow me to achieve that low moisture condition in my brush. So I remove some of the moisture, and you see when I make a mark, it doesn't give near the coverage as a damp or a loaded, fully loaded brush. So now I'm ready to make some brush marks using a low moisture content brush. Now I'm going to go back to the paper that I've been demonstrating on, and I have a medium-sized round brush that's loaded to a low moisture loading condition. And now you can see when I make my brush mark, it doesn't give full coverage as it did in the previous example. It creates a broken edge no matter what the orientation of my brush. It's giving me a broken edge as I make my brush mark because it's loaded to a low moisture condition. Now I'm going to do the same with a 1/2 inch flat brush, and actually with that brush stroke it's not at a low moisture condition, it's more damp, so I'm going to remove some of that moisture and come back, and now I'm getting the result that I want. You can see again I have a broken edge as I make my brush mark. So that's the effect that you get when you're working with a brush that's loaded to a low moisture content condition. Now here I've returned again back to a clip from a previous video, and I have my 1/2 inch flat brush, and initially there's quite a bit of water in there, it was damp, but now it's leaving a broken edge that I want to create the texture on this barn, and I'm working with a low moisture content in my brush. So that gives that nice textural quality, and this is a good application for that, where I'm trying to create that rough texture on the side of this covered bridge here in this painting. You can see that that loading of the brush is an effective way to create that texture. And that concludes this beginning watercolor tip about loading the brush, which is part 7 in my moisture content series. Hopefully this answers some of the questions I've received and gives a better idea of what happens at the palette when you're trying to prepare your brush for a saturated, damp, or low moisture condition. Be sure to check out Rick Surowicz Watercolor Friends and Subscribers on Facebook. And as always, if you have any questions about my materials, you can go to the studio page of my website, rsurowitzart.com. And if you have questions, you can email me at contact@rsurowitzart@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.